It's no surprise to any of my listeners that I am no fan of Donald Trump whatsoever on every level. I find him to be a loathsome human being. He has lied to his base, misrepresented grotesquely what he was going to do, even in those cases where there might be some shred of honor that could be attributed to what he was going to do. What he's actually done is far worse. I believe personally, regardless of how you feel about presidential proclamations, regardless of how you feel about President Obama, his decision this week, and not only the decision, but in the manner in which he conducted himself in both announcing and arriving at the decision, to be an aspect of the most loathsome nature of the Trump administration. Of course, we're talking about how he has treated Dakka. I am blessed tonight to have a very, very special guest in studio here. She's the executive director of Dorcas International. She is Kathleen Cloutier. Their organization has literally changed the landscape of Providence and Rhode Island for so many Rhode Islanders. And whether you be of lower income, whether you be of the population that they so ably serve, as Rhode Islanders, we all benefit from private organizations like this that really exemplify the very, very best of the American tradition. It's in direct contrast, if you will, for the political machinations that have occurred at Pennsylvania Avenue in D.C. over the last 9 months. By the way, I did not vote for Mr. Trump. I did not vote for Ms. Clinton. I voted for somebody else. So I can honestly say a pox on all of you because I voted against both of you. But it is a great pleasure, again, to introduce Kathleen Cloutier, Executive Director of Dorcas International. Welcome for the first time to the Coalition.
Thank you very much, Pat. I appreciate you made our organization sound so wonderful. I'm going to bring you with me everywhere I go.
No, it's just a great group of people doing great things, and we have tremendous admiration for people. Our hashtag on our show is Take It Personally. Your folks clearly take it very, very personally. But, when we have folks on the show, particularly for the first time, a big goal of the Coalition is for organizations like yours to, I'll call it a little bit of an infomercial, because, the media in this state, and I'm not going to go off on that tangent tonight, but the media in this state doesn't spend a lot of time really getting the background story. So if you can, tell us about the origins of Dorcas, what your missions are, and the type of work that you're involved in right now.
Oh, great. I get to tell my story. That's
absolutely, please.
So it's interesting that Dorcas International, the formal name is Dorcas International Institute of Rhode Island, and in 2013, Dorcas International was formed as the result of a merger of two nonprofit organizations. So you had Dorcas Place Adult and Family Literacy Center that was located on Elmwood Ave, Southside Providence, that basically was founded by the Sisters of St. Mercy in the 1980s somewhere, and they were targeting providing education for young single mothers who dropped out of high school in the 80s and weren't going back to school but needed an education to get a good job and raise their family and that kind of thing. So that was, and that had grown into probably one of the best known adult education centers, adult and family education centers in Rhode Island. And then the International Institute of Rhode Island, thus the name Dorcas International Institute of Rhode Island, was actually founded in 1921. And it started as a program of the YWCA, which is still around here. So we're one of the spin-offs of the YWCA. But it was initially founded as just a place for immigrant women, at the time it was Armenian women, to come and socialize while their husbands were at work and the kids were at school. And it was, a little bit of learning English and maybe learning the culture. But it was really kind of a place for these women who would normally have been isolated and not been able to integrate into the community. And it grew and grew after that to be well known, frankly, as a multi-service organization that served primarily immigrants and refugees. And so the International Institute was about who they served. Dorcas Place was about the adult education and the services they provided, because they provided English language classes and GED classes to anybody who walked in the doors. So 2013, the merger happened. I came in about 9 months later, and since then we've been trying to really fully integrate the best of both organizations, frankly. So we're best well known for our resettlement of refugees. So we're the largest resettlement agency in Rhode Island. There's only two of us. The Catholic Diocese, the Catholic Social Services, is the other resettlement agency. And together we probably, until this year, had been resettling 250 to 300 refugees each year from all over the world, every continent in the world, which adds to the beauty of the diversity of our state as well. And then, we built up a whole range of services around newcomers to the U.S. So we have interpreting and translating services. We have immigration and citizenship services, which I'll talk about later. We have English language classes, as well as high school equivalent GED. We also offer employment services. And so the adult education employment services are really offered to anybody. You can be a native Rhode Islander who's having difficulty finding a job or needing to work towards a GED, and you can come in and so. But again, most people will know us for the serving the immigrant and refugee population. So we feel like we need to provide a voice for our newcomers, and so that's the big overview of who we are. Again, we have a full range of services that also include a refugee resource center where we accept donated goods, household goods, and clothing. We have a clothing collaborative which provides anybody in the state who's looking for a job with a work-appropriate attire. Basically, we believe everybody who's looking for a job, everybody who's interviewing, should be dressed in a suit. Whatever the job is, doesn't matter. First impressions matter, right? And then if someone is able to get a job, we'll provide a week's worth of mix and match clothing. Also, all the clothing is donated. Some of it's new. Some people donate with tags on still. So it's a great support service in which we work with other organizations within the state to support their clients as well as our own. So yeah, that's pretty much who we are, what we do. We have actually been seriously impacted by all of the executive orders and the changes that have happened in the last 8 months. And so as you were talking earlier, I was thinking, for us emotionally, even though I have family in southern Florida, emotionally it just is feeling like a ping pong ball. Executive orders go in and the courts deny them and they come back. And I've worked in human services, nonprofit organizations for 35 years. Federally funded, government-funded organizations, and so I'm used to dealing with new administrations. Some people like us, some people don't. Cut the funding, add the funding, but it's never been quite this drastic. This really feels like you're not really sure what's going to happen. So that's where I am today.
Right. Speak to and earlier this year in another format, I had the opportunity to sit with Omar Ba of the Refugee Dream Center, Steve Brown of the ACLU, folks from the Progressive Democrats, folks from the National Libertarian Party, Reason Magazine. We all had kind of a love-in right after the refugee executive order went down. And it was a 3-hour protest. It was really a great experience for me because Stephen Brown, of course, is amazing. He spent half hour, 45 minutes really speaking to the constitutional issues. Then, of course, we had some folks from the National Libertarian Party, Reason Magazine. We spoke to, if you will, the cultural issues surrounding it. Omar Ba was a revelation, and we had the folks from Prism call in. It's not that I needed to know this, but it was a great reminder. Folks, particularly political refugees, for whom, for some reason, this administration has literally put in the crosshairs, are amongst the bravest, most liberty-loving folks that you will ever meet anywhere.
I would agree.
They go through a vetting process that is extreme. It has nothing to do with the vetting process used in Western Europe. But these are people, and I want your reflection on this. It strikes me that I've met, as I've kind of gone on my own journey and met through this show, more people who are refugees, that these are people who literally were willing to give their lives for a life of freedom. That the motivation coming here was not to live off the government, It was a desire to bring their families or to raise families in true liberty. The irony being, of course, from my perspective, I want to hear yours, but the irony being, of course, is that the very people who purport to be lovers of liberty and drape themselves in the American flag on a daily basis and use it as a rationalization for some of the most abhorrent behavior I've seen in my 56 years, don't recognize the true constitution of these people, the Omar Bas of the world, who literally slipped through a police cordon, was tortured literally to get to the United States, and has led a successful, philosophically, a successful economic, and a productive civil life as well. Well, that's what I think. What are your thoughts?
Ditto. It's amazing when I first met Omar. So he was resettled by the International Institute 10 years ago, and it was interesting. I was at a meeting where he was celebrating his 10th anniversary, and I'm thinking, it's amazing. I don't know that I could be that brave, that successful, that happy in just 10 years. And it really, the first thing I noticed when I came to work at Dorcas International and work with this population is the resilience. And I would agree absolutely with you. I think they carry the American spirit more than you and I do. And I believe that we are both patriots. And they really, truly value freedom where we take it for granted.
Absolutely.
And they live the spirit of the open arms and welcoming, and they believe that America is a really truly welcoming country. They believe that they are going to succeed, that they have opportunity here that they never would have. It's fascinating to me because I had one of our board members was trying to explain why he was on our board, and he said, and it's resonated with me, he said, I have to think about myself and how bad would it have to be for me to pick up and leave everything I know, my home, my family, my friends, my work, my business, everything I know, take a suitcase and land somewhere where, like Kenya or Rwanda, where I don't know the language, I don't know the culture, I don't know a single soul. How bad is it back home that I'm willing to do that without any guarantees? Nobody's guaranteeing me success. Nobody's guaranteeing me that I'm going to be okay. Basically, refugees arrive here we give them $1,000 and we say, here's an apartment, here's a little bit of food, you've got $1,000. Now, we'll help you find a job, but then you're on your own. And it's really, the program, in my opinion, was never really, it was never really designed to succeed. It was designed to be able to have parties agree that we could put a little bit of tax dollars to try and rescue folks. And there's 65 million refugees across the world, right? But we were feeling guilty, as in Vietnam, where all the Southeast Asians were escaping, right? Because they were going to be punished or killed or whatever because they had helped the U.S., the American troops. We felt guilty. We brought them over and said, we're not sure we want to support them, but you've got a safe place. And so it really is not. I know the perception sometimes is that they're just takers, but honestly, refugees especially, but immigrants as well, they want to give back. They believe in this country. And so Omar opened the Refugee Dream Center to help refugees behind him. That's how dedicated he is to really giving back. He got support when he came here. He wants to give it back to those that follow him.
Yeah, you bring up an interesting point because I want to juxtapose the experience in the United States with the Southeast Asian population that, under the most dire circumstances, literally were evacuated in some cases by helicopter as Saigon fell. As a result, refugees from the killing fields of Cambodia, many of whom live in Rhode Island. Rhode Island's got a very strong Southeast Asian population. Now, what's interesting to me is the dichotomy here. Some of that guilt of getting them here was associated with the notion that on a political level, that we don't want to say this out loud because it's a very complicated issue, but on a political level, not that we failed them. We allowed, despite the loss of tens of thousands of great Americans, we created an environment which aided in the collapse of that society. How's that? Flash forward to a variety of the Middle East hotspots where one can argue that despite arguably, for many of us, a 4-year education history, we created some of those same environments. And our political intervention has aided, I won't say always caused, but clearly been part of the recipe for the disasters in Syria, Afghanistan, on it, the occupied territories, on and on and on. And yet, this current administration would dismiss those refugees, who in many cases helped us, in literally taking up arms in some cases on our behalf, sponsored by the United States, and has essentially turned their back on them.
Right. That's exactly what I feel has happened.
Leading literally to potential catastrophic harm for these folks in equally difficult circumstances. One can argue that Syria is its own 21st century killing field.
Absolutely, yeah.
Where do you think the political disconnect is? I mean, this is an incredibly broad question, but how the hell did we get here?
Well, I wish I knew. I honestly do. Because when you think about it, I was initially going to say it's Islamophobia. It's this idea that anybody who is a Muslim is a terrorist, and we don't know the difference. But when you think about the Southeast Asians, right, I think there are folks who didn't connect to Asians, and so maybe thought that they were, how do you tell the North Vietnamese from the South Vietnamese, or I don't know, So I'm not sure that that's what it is, but I do feel that we've lost some heart. And quite frankly, we suffered a terrible economic downfall a few years ago, but the reality is we're doing so much better, and so I don't understand what the fears are. I really don't. And, I don't want to be naive about that, because I do think that fear is playing into this, but I'm not quite sure where it's coming from. Because quite frankly, I mean, if we're placing refugees in jobs, they're in jobs that employers are begging us to fill because they can't fill them otherwise. It's not really that these folks are taking anything away from us, and if they become successful, we only benefit from that. So what's the fear in there? So I hope you have an answer, because I really don't.
No, well, I have one suggestion, but again, let's evolve the juxtaposition one step further. Partially as a result of our willingness to, and ironically, as a libertarian, to me, some of the private charities were the ones who did the best work. But within literally a generation, Southeast Asians who arrived here facing a foreign language, a foreign culture, literally a foreign alphabet, no job prospects whatsoever, and having just been in direct war with the not the kind of murky issues with ISIS, and we were at war with them. You don't have to go back that far to understand that the red threat was portrayed as a function of the Vietnamese and Cambodians. And one of the selling points on our involvement there was that we were the last barrier to prevent communism from taking over the world. So this is the environment that these people walked into. Yet within a generation, it can be argued that, and again, I'm painting with broad brush here, that a significant percentage of them occupy roles in the middle to upper middle class, if not outright business success through, in most cases, hard work, strong family structures, flexibility, the A word, assimilation, all right? So these people were able to do that. And I believe fear is the operative word here. Not so much that the ordinary American is, when they get into close, regular contact with people, are afraid of someone, but I believe you've got a government that is manipulating intentionally the perspective of folks from the Middle East in an attempt to create a bogeyman so that they can politically unify a troubled, disintegrating, challenged middle class and create them as this 21st century equivalent threat as we did in so many other generations. This is the reason why you're failing, when nothing could be further from the truth. That's my personal opinion.
And that could be, you could persuade me pretty easily on that one, yeah. Because again, I do think we've, in our history, have always had a scapegoat of someone or another.
Right.
And they're generally people that don't look like you and I, and they're generally, sort of the
Wouldn't be prudent.
disadvantaged.
It's creepy
this
right
all
here.
the time, yeah, I was gonna
So here we are. It's 2017. Earlier this year, we had academics, doctors, engineers stuck in airports, and the late great Vincent A. Buddy Cianci, who, despite some challenges, I was always a big fan of, and particularly in his role in the media, because he pointed out the notion of what I call vapor stories. You go back a few years, and the sharks were going to kill us all.
Okay.
And then one day we moved on to something else.
Okay.
So the major media, the last time we heard, you had this refugee embargo, and you literally had, in one case, you had a Brown University visiting professor stuck in an airport.
Yep.
Several court cases later, and you could probably, from your perspective, feel the short attention span of the American body politic waning and waiting. What is the status now of refugees, particularly political refugees, coming into this country?
So I can tell you what we've experienced here. My understanding is, so the timing of the executive order, the June one, the one where the Supreme Court finally got involved and said, yes, we can put this in place for the 120 days, but if someone has a family member, a relative, if you remember, and then there was some argument about what is a family member and how many of these people can come. So between the end of January and near the end of June, June 24th, so for that, was that 6 months or maybe 5 months, we were seeing sort of this slowing down of refugees coming in. Now, last year had been an extremely busy year. Obama had expanded the numbers allowed in, but there had been this standing with the executive order, this reduction of from 117,000 refugees that Obama was allowing in beginning October to reduce it at 50,000. Well, just about June 24th, when this executive order went into place, the country had hit 50,000 refugees. And so there began a real significant slowing for the period January to June while it was in court, and there was no executive order in place, but the pipeline, if you will, was slowing down. The executive order went into place officially first, whenever, in June 24th, at which time all refugees stopped coming to Rhode Island. Now, we've received one refugee in August that had a family member. However, what I want to say is our pipeline of refugees, 50% of them have a familial relationship, a relative here that was sponsoring them. So we expected at least 50% of the numbers coming in, and we got one. Now, we're expecting a few more in September, but the executive order ban doesn't end until October 24th, which is into the new fiscal year. So what we've been told is the new fiscal year in October, there's a 50,000 number that's been thrown out in terms of the numbers of refugees to arrive. In the past administrations, for years, when the president announces a number as 50,000, it's a target. And so we can pretty much count on, unless something drastic like 9/11 or something drastic happens to interrupt travel, then we can expect what numbers would happen. So 50,000 refugees in the country would end up to be probably about 150, maybe 200 refugees in Rhode Island. Okay, just the way the numbers work. And so we were just recently told last week that this administration is looking at the 50,000 number as a maximum, not a target, which means that they can create all kinds of ways to slow entry, similarly to, well, you have to have a family member, or you have to go through a whole nother year's worth of vetting or something like, it's the procedures and the processes that can get in the way of the pipeline coming down. So we were told, we have a national volunteer agency. Every refugee resettlement organization is affiliated with one of 9 national organizations. So our national organization told us, you can budget for this number, this 150 that we're giving you, but I suggest you really budget for half of that, and even do a worst case scenario budget of 0, because we can't count on the fact that this number of 50,000 really means anything to this administration. And the more things I'm seeing and hearing, Dakka and all those, the more I'm willing to believe that, if we've gotten one person that had a family relative from the end of June to the end of August, that's a slow, we've not seen those kinds of slowdowns before.
Define for our listeners, because an important part of this evening is really clearing up a lot of the urban legends, the myths, the misnomers. How do you define a refugee? Is it a political refugee? Is it someone just trying to get into the country? Give us your parameters. And in the case of Rhode Island, is there one dominant part of the world where folks come from, or is it, for example, this one refugee, or is it just a mix that changes every year?
It's a mix that changes every year, or changes every few years. It's kind of whatever's going on in the world. And Providence and Rhode Island has actually been recognized nationally as being a very welcoming state. And it's the diversity of all the folks that we have here that makes it more welcoming. What they say in Washington is, what's great about Providence is a refugee's walking down the street and you can't tell it's a refugee, right? It can be anybody, someone who's been here for a while. And so that's the beauty of the diversity that we have here. So a refugee is technically identified as someone who has been displaced, forcefully displaced from their home. Now, it can be because they had fear of death, torture, or violence of war. So the political refugee, like Omar, was fearing for his life because someone in the government thought that he was not good for the country and wanted to...
And literally, there was a price on his head.
Yeah.
This was not, folks, and I've heard people say this, I've heard people allude to it just, they just wanted to come here because they can make more money. Well, in Omar's case, and in so many of the Southeast Asian refugees, I don't think there's any doubt that Omar Ba would have been dead if he hadn't left the country when he left the country. Right. He tells a story that literally one of the officers who was searching a bus for him was a high school chum.
Yeah.
And that anybody else, and he would be
He would have been done. They had guns pointed at him. It was, absolutely. And he was a journalist in the Gambia. And so I've got a gentleman working for me who was a journalist in another African country and had to flee. It's the journalist, and when we talk about fake media, we can go into that. That's another topic. But
yeah.
When you think about how the journalist can be a threat to a government, and so similarly. So those are the political. What we have, we receive some Iraqis that get special immigrant visas. They get the benefits of a refugee, but the reality is they were helping American troops when we were in Iraq.
Right.
And now they're in fear for their families' lives because the Iraqi government thinks they were traitors.
The Iraqi government thinks they're traitors. ISIS thinks they're traitors.
So
there is literally no safe haven.
They have a no-win situation. And when you think about that, they sacrificed this in order to help us as we were invading or being in their country without invitation or whatever that was.
Yeah, there's that.
Yeah. So.
By the way, last year, for folks who listen to the show, you've heard me talk about this. Last year was the 100th anniversary of something called the Sykes-Picot Accord, which was, and Google it, and some other show I'll get the professors from Brown again to talk about it. But that was essentially when Western powers divvied up what we now know as Syria, that entire part of the world, and planted the seeds literally for the chaos we have now, ignoring thousands of years of tribal religious
interesting
history.
Because I was talking to some of our clients, and they were it was a Syrian and an Iraqi, and we were in a meeting or something like that, and they called each other brother, and I said, "Oh, you guys know each other?" No, we're from the same place. somebody just artificially drew this line, and all of a sudden this is Syria and this is
Yeah, it
Iraq
was the
or
British.
whatever, yeah. I
British and
didn't
French.
realize that. Oh,
Yeah,
my
it's,
goodness.
and literally it's, when you talk about history and you reference the interventionism of Western powers, you're derided as a kook and, you know, an apologist, and you're appeasement, and then you're this and you're that, and, you know, I mean, my 9/11 creds, I worked in the World Trade Center on and off for 10 years. I lost 4 friends on 9/11. You know, I have family members who are studying the Middle East as a profession. I'm no stranger to this. Yet I'm not a direct family member, but I'm no stranger. I lost friends that day. I do not believe in appeasement. I believe that ISIS needs to be, you know, the criminal element of ISIS needs to be hunted down, but we also need to recognize that countries have borders, and we need to accord those countries the same border respect that the current administration is demanding for ourselves.
For ourselves, absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
So, but that, you know, I wanted to get folks to understand that the folks you're working with are not people slipping over the border
No,
to take
no.
jobs that, yeah, blah, 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 blah.
So so what happens is now 65 million people have been forcefully chased from their homes. 65 million. Now, less than 1% of them actually get to travel and seek refuge. So the United Nations has a council that basically takes people through a vetting process to really determine that their life is in danger, that, you know, they have a price on their head or whatever, and so they have to go through this. It's quite a long process to be deemed a refugee. It's the United Nations that says, okay, of you 65 million. Here's 6.5 million of you are deemed to be refugees, and you can wait in line, and we'll get to you sooner or later. Then of those deemed refugees, as I said, only 1% of them, well, maybe more than 1%, because it's 1% of the total, but only a few of them, when you think of 6.5 million, the U.S. is taking the largest number of refugees, and we're taking 50,000.
Right.
Now, you have to know that in Europe, what people are calling refugees are not authorized refugees. They are folks that got in a boat and you know. So what's happening in Europe is not what's happening in the U.S. And I think there was a lot of confusion,
Right.
especially when the Syrians were starting to come in, that people were feeling like, you know, oh no, they're going to, 50,000 this year is the maximum number of refugees that we're going to accept. Now, in Rhode Island, we probably have the highest number last year came from the Democratic Republic of Congo. The second highest came from Somalia. And then we had the third highest was probably Syria. We do have a large American Syrian population here,
Right.
and they really reached out welcomingly. They weren't a community of their own; they were spread out all over the state. But when Syrian refugees started to arrive, and our governor was saying, "Yes, you can let them in," then we were deemed as one of the more friendly states for Syrian refugees.
Is it Thomas Lizet? Is that how you pronounce the name? Former mayor of Central Falls. Is prominent in the Syrian American community, and his family's been here for 3 generations.
Yes, yeah, many generations, very, very successful, very established businesses, and you know, all kinds of things.
All the things that group that drapes themselves in the American flag would approve of, not knowing even that some of these people are Syrian.
That's absolutely right. Because you know, when you think of folks from the Middle East, you think of swarthy skin or whatever. Syrians are, you know, as Caucasian as you and I in terms of how they look. So it's really, you know,
And they represent a variety of religious traditions.
absolutely, yeah. It's not, you know, one single. As is many refugees are coming from different parts of the countries where there may have been civil war, and that was one of the reasons for it. You'd have both sides of the civil war being resettled here, but again, so those are the top 4 countries. We do resettle quite a few of the Iraqi translators and their families, and so and a few Afghanis. We've had a few Bhutanese, I guess, but really the primary focus is on the Somalis, the Congolese,
Right.
Syrians. So who knows what's going to happen this year, because nobody's coming in at this point. But
Right, and so you've got this bottleneck occurring, and the unintended irony of this is that the ideal for these folks, particularly for the last two generations, has been that American ideal. Because it was not only seen as a place of liberty, but it was seen as a place they would be welcomed in.
And opportunities.
Right.
That there would be opportunities. And when you think about it, even with immigrants, refugees, immigrants, doesn't matter. They want what we want. They want to just be able to provide for their families. And if you can't provide for your family at home because it's war-torn or ISIS has invaded or...
well, let's just say hypothetically you'd induce, based on a prohibition style of a drug war, you'd induced a high level of narco-terrorism in a significant part of Central America.
Yes.
I mean, but that could never happen, right? No. American foreign policy at work again.
Yeah. So I don't know. I don't actually I wonder sometimes if our government had ever realized the impacts of all these decisions we were making. Short term.
I think they do. I think a lot of them just didn't care. And I want to point out, one of the actually, I'm Irish American. I'm an American, but my family happens to be from Irish background. I believe they call them the Donnelly visas. We're in the 70s and 80s, and if you want an unfair treatment because of the prestige of a certain former senator, now deceased from Massachusetts, who had undue influence in the state, talk about unfair preferential treatment. It was actually the Irish Americans who got an entire program dedicated to them. So spare me the indignation over some folks from Guatemala or the Dominican Republic. Spare me.
Yeah.
Because the other irony is that most respected studies, and this as my mom would have said, my late mom would have said, this slays me, show that the actual level of criminality amongst refugees is actually much lower than the general population.
Oh, much lower. As is, and as is even immigrants. So immigrants,
Right.
I was thinking undocumented immigrants actually have a lot less crime or a lot less criminal activity because again they want to be here, and again legal not, we can argue all of that, but they're here to provide for their families. They're here for reasons that you and I and all of us can relate to, and I would advocate that let's find a way for them to be able to pay their dues, if you will, and earn the right to path to citizenship, really.
I want to take a quick break right now. Folks, if you're just tuning in, Kathleen Cloutier is the Executive Director of Dorcas International here in Providence, providing immigrant services, educational services, providing services literally to Rhode Island and beyond, also providing really a national example of just how it can be done. We spent the first half hour or so talking sort of as a backdrop, talking about the organization, its history, its mission, its goals, some of the programs in place right now. Of course, I would be remiss if I didn't take a quick break and mention the sponsor for this hour's segment, Beacon Shipping and Logistics. Of course, beaconshippingandlogistics.com. That's beaconshippingandlogistics.com. Nationwide, door-to-door, reliable transportation. 855-3-SHIP-IT. If you've got an automobile, say for example, now we've gotten a little bit past the college season when a lot of folks I know use Beacon Shipping to get their car, the family junker, out to their kiddo in college. Now it's the time of year where a lot of people are buying cars, and God bless the internet, people are buying them through a variety of websites from around the nation. It's a wonderful local resource with national and international reach that can help you find effective, cost-effective, safe, reliable transportation for that all-important vehicle. You may have an older relative who is no longer able to drive, and you want to transition that vehicle to another family member in another part of the country. BeaconShippingLogistics.com. As we always say in a moment like this, these are local businesses willing to support, particularly after this week, highly controversial independent media. They deserve your respect, and they also deserve your business. It's the best way, whether it be us, RI Future, Motive, RI Free Radio, any one of the number of local independent media outlets, self-financed, labors of love, believe me. You need to support local sponsors, businesses that obviously, as we like to take it on the show, we call it hashtag taking it personally. I want to focus on our next segment on a press release that I got today, and talking about, of course, Dakka. Again, as we said in the opening part of the show, and I hope you realize that for your organization, the door is always open here. You just show up. It's all good. Friday night, 6 to 9. You got something going on, just kind of knock, wave. Tony will let you in, and it's all good. Let's give folks a little background. What is Dakka?
DACA is an acronym that stands for Deferred Action of Childhood Arrivals. And so what it was an executive order that President Obama had signed into law after Congress was unable to pass legislation that would support these kids. These kids, they were kids at the time. They're young adults likely now. DACA's been in effect since 2012, so it's been around for 5 years. And there were some very specific requirements that a young person had to have come into the country as a minor. So their parents came in, either came in legally and overstayed or came in illegally, but the kids had no choice. And if they could, when they reached 16, they could prove that they had been here since 2007. And that took a lot of work to do, because who thinks that they have to prove that they're here, especially if they're living in the shadows. Mm-hmm. But the beauty of what DACA is it defers deportation for these kids. It says you have to graduate from high school, you have to be working, there's some real requirements. You have to have, you can't get into trouble, no criminal activity, you can't get arrested, you have to be good citizens, quite frankly. And if you can do that, then we will defer deportation. However, in order to do that, you have to give over all of your information, which initially when DACA came into effect, there was a lot of suspicion. Well, what happens if Obama isn't reelected? And what happens if the next administration comes in and after, and so...
I mean, what happens if some lunatic becomes attorney general, talks about marijuana users as, in reefer madness terms, and seeks to turn this into a racist culture? I mean, I know that's nutty.
I know. Who would have thought?
As we like to say here, what could possibly go wrong?
Right.
All right. So I'm sorry. So it's
President Obama was reelected, and they said, okay, we have 4 years to figure this out. Now, DACA is basically allows these folks to receive a legal work authorization, so they can legally work. It's as if it's it's similar to a green card, but it's temporary. It's only for 2 years, and after 2 years they can reapply. And the idea being that it's kind of the government keeping an eye on them. Are you still in school? Are you still working? Are you still not joining a gang or participating in anything that's illegal? And if you do that, then you have 2 more years of not having to worry about being deported. Excuse me. So probably the numbers are high-ranging, but from the information we could see, there are probably since 2012, there have been 1,400 and some odd applications for DACA. So it's an application.
Here in Rhode Island?
In Rhode Island,
okay.
Yeah. So it's an application process like any immigration process, any citizenship application. What's the DACA application? Costs $495. So this person has to pay the government $495.
Which, by the way, is, that's a lot of money for anybody.
It's a lot of money for anybody.
You're talking about first-generation immigrants. Regardless of your perspective on them, as a libertarian, as you can imagine, that goes... I mean, you're putting people in incredibly difficult circumstances to stay compliant with the law.
That's right.
For people who are willing to be compliant with the law.
And work hard to stay compliant with the law. Right?
So 495 times 1,400, I'm thinking that the government, just a thought here, might have been able to do without that. I'm not thinking that had a real dollar impact on the budget.
Again, similarly to the refugee program, this immigration program, somewhere along the line, the politicians decided that they didn't want taxpayer dollars going to support government employees reviewing applications of people who want to stay here. So it's United States Citizenship and Immigration Services is where this money goes to, and 90+% of their budget is non-tax dollars. So it's these immigrants who are paying their salaries to review, and then if you're not approved, if you're denied, you've just lost $495, and now you have to worry about deportation.
You literally have a target on you, and you
Yeah.
literally have handed them everything you need
yes.
to
Yes.
like, I'm here, I'm over here.
Including your family's information, so
Right.
your parents who have no recourse, right? Because they're here not legally, and so they are in fear of deportation. But this young person has basically given up their parents,
Right.
and so that's part of what they do.
And anecdotally, and you would know as something of somewhat of an expert, it would appear to me that the Trump administration, despite claims to the contrary, is targeting basically whoever they can find.
Yes.
The political point was that they were not going to go after people who were just here, that they were going to focus on the bad hombres.
Yes.
Right. That is the lie word too strong to use. I mean, he lied.
Not to me.
Okay. All right. So these folks then literally, they're here. They're here. They were not born in the United States. They literally might have been a toddler when they were brought here. What do you say to people, and you hear this on talk radio everywhere, who want to criminalize small children? What?
All right, yeah, right. What child has ever made a decision for themselves, right or wrong, that they can be held accountable for before they turn 18 or 16 or whatever? Yeah, no, that's just, from my perspective, that it's ridiculous, quite frankly. But even more importantly, and this is what I argue with the critics, right? That if we want immigration reform and we only want to bring in those highly talented, highly educated immigrants to, help us do all these wonderful things, and we no longer want to bring those poor family members of people that are already here. So criteria-based immigration services. Well, when you think about these DACA folks, that's who we want to bring in. Highly educated, right? They had to have finished school. They have to be working. They're young. They're technologically savvy. They're successful. And what gave them success, quite frankly, was this ability to work. So now I can pay my in-state tuition to get a college degree, and now I can get a driver's license, so now I can drive to a good-paying job. And these are the people, if we want to screen out immigrants, these immigrants are the ones we want, so why not give them a chance? Their parents made the mistake, right? I'm not even going to argue about make the parents pay or whatever, but it was their parents who made the mistake.
Right.
Give these kids, they're here. They think they're American. You hear the stories where some kids didn't even realize that they were not here legally until they applied for college financial aid or they tried to get their driver's license. They grew up as Americans and they speak English. They don't have to, go to English classes. It really is a shame. What they say actually is, and there was an economic study, New American Economy did an economic study, and primarily of refugees, but this applies to immigrants as well. If a refugee child comes in before the age of 14, there is no additional education expense because they end up doing as well or better than their peers. So they're graduating high school, so there's no, other than that first year or so of having to learn English, and they need to catch up, but they are driven to learn and really do as well. They're successful. So there's no intervention or extra special help or anything that the education system, and that's who these dreamers are. They went through our education systems. They are the best of who we are, in my opinion. And so that's my argument with the critics.
And many of them, no small amount of them have joined the armed services.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Are still there, have served with honor, have served in war, in combat. Absolutely. I mean, and as I said earlier, immigrants and refugees really believe in the Americans, but they believe in freedom. They believe, and as I said, these kids were raised as they were first-generation Americans, and they understand how difficult it was for their parents, so they appreciate this country.
You know, somehow, and I don't know if this is possible, I mean, this is Pollyannish of me, in the being raised Irish American, my mom in the 60s was one of the local head honchos of the Democratic Party. So, as I like to say, I've been following politics now for 51 years. Mm-hmm. You grew up around the dinner table with it. The real revelation to me in the last few years is I watch all these political movements take place, whether it be marriage equality, dozens of them, racial equality, women's rights, is that familiarity does not in fact breed contempt. It breaks down barriers, breaks down walls. Yeah. And when, as I always like to say, people here who listen to the show before, and hear me say this 1,000 times, whenever the word "the" is used in front of an identifier, whether it be a religious group or racial group, that means you're typically just sort of pigeonholing a group of people into one identity group. So we talk about the gays, the blacks, and of course we're going back in time here, the Mexicans, the illegals. The minute you say "the," you're dehumanizing people. Right. And I'm not exactly a touchy-feely kind of guy, but it's to me that's one of the most blatant signifiers that we no longer look upon these people as people. To me, and I've said it many times, one of the reasons that marriage equality finally took place in this nation was that people woke up and realized that it wasn't the gays, it was my cousin Bill, or my co-worker Jane, or all of a sudden my kids. In my family's case, as I like to point out to my kid's favorite Bible school teacher growing up was a woman at the time pre-marriage equality involved in a long-term single-sex relationship. How is that for irony, folks?
You gotta love it.
Yeah. So so the question is, if in fact we're going, as I like to use the term single-stage thinking. Troglodytes. If we're going to break down this hate, because you just hear the same pattern of response, and I'm a small government guy. I'm the chairman of the State Libertarian Party, but we believe as a political movement, and we are a movement and a philosophy. We believe in the free exchange of ideas, commerce, and people. We don't differentiate. So how do we, as Rhode Island society? Because the point I'm trying to get to is when you meet refugees who are here, who in many cases have the most modest lifestyles imaginable. I mean, some of these people are working day jobs, and if they manage to get a license, they're driving Uber at nights, they're doing this, just an astonishing rate. I mean, they did the gig economy before the gig economy. Yes, this patchwork quilt of ways to keep their family going with an inordinate obsession with education, right? Frankly, if you meet an Omar Ba, and it doesn't have to be someone as effusive as he is. If you meet an Omar Ba, you walk away a changed person. It changes your perspective right away on this. So I guess the challenge is, if we're going to stop the hate speak, because it's counterproductive, all right, how do we get people just to hang out with each other? I mean, it probably sounds silly, but I mean...
That's basically, in our organization, that's how we're looking at our mission, right? So it's not only... bringing people here or working with them to integrate into the community. It's also working with the community to help welcome and integrate our clients. And so what does that take? And so we have this wonderful, so we do this in several ways. We just, a couple weekends ago, had our World Refugee Day up at Roger Williams Park, gorgeous day. And so basically, the World Refugee Day is a celebration of refugees in Rhode Island. It's a world celebration, so it's refugees all over the world. But it really does, it celebrates all the positive things that we had talked about, the resilience and the love of liberty and freedom. But the whole event is put on by refugees, and so they're providing the entertainment, and they're mingling along with the rest of us, and so it is an opportunity to chat or talk or sit at a table with and share some food. But better yet, what we've been doing this year is we have what we call it's a Welcoming Rhode Island exhibit, and it's called My Story, Our Community. Because, Pat, if we share our stories, who we are, where we came from, your Irish mother is a politician, the more I get to know about you, the more I understand your story, the more I can find a place to relate to you. And I learned that actually, it was interesting. I was invited to do a Thanksgiving Day service, present at a Thanksgiving Day service. And what the pastor had asked me to talk about is not about refugees and immigrants like everybody else needs to talk about.
Right.
But he wanted to know how I got into this work. And he said, I want you to share your story. I'm like, what's my story got to do with it? I'm Irish American, blah, 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 you know, whatever. But what had happened was, as I was stressing over it over the weeks, you know, I started to write my story down, and I kept finding points within my own story that allows me to relate to how bad does it have to be for me to leave everything, or relate in some way to being different or looking different or whatever it was. And so as I sat and told my story, after the service, I had more than 24 people come up to me, and they took a piece of my story and they said, I just want you to know, I lived in South Carolina for blah, 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 or, you know, I was a black man and blah, blah, blah. You know, it was they each related to a small part of my story, which is not a very exciting story. So what we're doing is we work with Providence College Global Studies students, and a group of 2 or 3 students will interview a refugee or an immigrant that's living in Rhode Island, and hear their story. They the students, based on the interview, will write up a story, take a photograph, and we have these poster boards, and so the story's in print. And we have a roving display going across all 39 cities and towns. We're working in the library systems. So people in small town communities who maybe won't see someone on the street can read about some of the stories. But more importantly, we have an event where we invite the public to come and meet. So every year we do about 10 different stories, and they get to meet the people whose the stories were. And again, it's that introduction, here they are, the person speaks, and often they're very successful. They may have been here 5 or 10 years, the Omars of the world. I think we have a story on Omar. And over the years, we have over 100 stories now. So why not continue to share? Now, pasteboard isn't the same as meeting the person, but these annual events, you get to meet the person and talk a little, because you've heard their story. So now you've got something you can relate to. Oh, I didn't know you worked at Brown, and it may be as simple as that, you know. So those are the kinds of things. I'm playing around with Leadership Rhode Island is doing Jeffersonian dinners. Group of 10 people who don't know each other are facilitated discussion over a meal. How better to get to know somebody than over breaking bread and you know, offering opinions that may be different, but in a safe way to do that. It's discussion, it's conversation. And I think if we all can do more of that, talking to people who don't think like us, because we've all heard, you know, we only follow Facebook pages that think like us, and we only stay with our own. And that has to do with that inner circle, middle circle, outer circle, that's, I forget his name.
But we all want to preach to our own and then choir.
Yeah.
You don't, you know, and it takes a very outgoing person to be willing to break that I'll call it the philosophical cycle of violence, because, you know, as the problem with social media, and I'm a creature of social media, is that, number one, people who are, let's just say, they misrepresent activism, real legitimate activism that we're going to talk about in a couple of minutes in terms of some stuff you've got coming up, with, excuse my language, bitching and moaning on Facebook. They're two very, very different things. And then, unfortunately, that builds into a crescendo, because so often you don't have opposing viewpoints. And usually those arguments just end up, there's no personal meaning at stake.
Right.
Very often you never have a conversation with that person ever again, never mind in person. But as a result, all of that interaction between communities never happens. And yet, I believe people somehow think it has, that they've exposed themselves to the greater world, when in fact, they've cocooned themselves. And that's, I believe, the real tragedy of social media.
I agree.
You folks issued, and and I say you because you and the ACLU sort of took the lead on issuing a press release today that came across my desk, and you've got a coalition going on. Tell me about the press release and some of the other groups that are involved, and what you've got planned as a reaction against the removal or the suspension of DACA.
All right, so a couple of things going on simultaneously, and I think as a result of a lot of things going on, but the DACA repeal being the most recent. Basically, the ACLU and we and a group of other organizations that I can read the list here because I won't remember them all, but really folks who are supportive of our immigrant communities sent some letters to our state legislators as well as to the municipal leaders. Now, this is following up on the fact that we had sent letters to the governor and the attorney general and the Supreme Court judge or the Supreme,
right.
Yeah. And so, and got some reaction, and we were starting to see the governor and the attorney general kind of take some action in terms of supporting DACA and the immigrant communities. What we're asking of the state legislature, specifically around DACA, is to say, okay, now these kids, I call them kids, excuse me, they're young adults. These young adults have been living for the last several years, 5 years now, 6 years, 7 years, I don't know, it's 5 years. With driver's licenses, they've been able to pay in-state tuition, they've been able to work and support themselves, and if nothing happens in the Congress, within 6 months they'll start to lose all those rights. So what we're asking, there's a couple of House bills in the works, one of which has to do with driver's licenses for undocumented immigrants, and what we're asking the Assembly to do is to narrow that a little bit and say, look, allow driver's licenses for DACA recipients. They've had them, they've been living with licenses, and we're just asking that they allow these young adults to keep their licenses that they've been already awarded. We're also asking that there be, that we treat these DACA recipients as Rhode Islanders and that they're allowed to continue with their in-state tuition at state colleges. And again, something that they've been entitled to that we're taking. So basically what we're asking the Assembly to do is to pass some legislation that supports the DACA recipients just as they've been supported. Just because the federal law goes away doesn't necessarily mean that in Rhode Island we have to treat them any differently than we have to date. So that's the push there, and I've got bill numbers and everything if you folks are interested in it. But with the municipal leaders, the ACLU had sent out about a month ago, maybe even longer, some basic kind of ways in which municipalities could adopt legal ways of, and they're legal, not becoming sanctuary cities, but legal ways of avoiding having to work closely with ICE, which is the Immigration Enforcement, the deportation police. And again, it was also recognizing, that without warrants, you really don't have to turn over folks who have been identified as undocumented. So those kinds of policies is what we're asking the local cities and towns to take a look at and see if we can't be more open in supporting these young people who have had the legal right to be here, and they're no different just because somebody signed a piece of paper to take their rights away. So that's what that's all about. In the meantime, and I don't know how closely your followers have followed what the repeal of DACA means, but there's this this very short window between now and October 5th where those DACA recipients' work authorization lasts for 2 years, and it's 2 years from when they applied. And so every month there's several hundreds of people across the country that have to reapply. So they've opened this window for only a month for anyone whose work authorization will be expiring between September 5th and March 5th. So over the next 6 months, while Congress is supposed to be working on something, if you want your DACA authorization renewed, you have to apply in the next 3.5 weeks. as I said, we think there's 12 to 1,400 DACA recipients in Rhode Island. If we take 25% of them, so if you take a 2-year period window of DACA authorization, anyone who has something expiring in 6 months is about a quarter of the recipients. They're going to need to send in their applications and get their $495 in the next 3.5 weeks. So as a result, at Dorcas International Institute, we do offer immigration services. We have some immigration attorneys and caseworkers, and we normally do help DACA recipients renew their, apply for and renew. Now, there are no new applications accepted, so these are just for folks who need to renew. We're offering what we're calling DACA clinics, meaning people can walk in without an appointment and come in anywhere from 9 to 4:30 during the week, Monday through Friday, to have their DACA application processed and mailed in. Now, with the walk-ins, often there's a wait. It's first come, first serve. We've got someone dedicated to do it all day long, so you'll be seen. But we also encourage people to make an appointment. And we've the 2 attorneys and 10 caseworkers have cleared their calendars and made DACA a priority for the next 3.5 weeks because it's such a short window, and that
it's really you're in crisis mode right now.
Basically, it is. We're calling them emergency DACA clinics, and so we're making sure that we can accommodate. So you want to make an appointment an evening, Saturday, during the week, we'll accommodate when people are available to come. The other concern we've had is that, as I said earlier, $495 is a lot, and if you didn't think you needed to reapply for DACA until March, you don't have $495.
You probably might have just paid for college tuition.
Right. Or yeah, absolutely.
Or you paid an insurance bill
and so you've kind of got in your mind, oh, I've got to save, and now all of a sudden in 3.5 weeks,
where do you find
that money, right? So we reached out to the Capital Good Fund, which is
Andrew Posner.
Yeah, and he's created what he's calling a DACA loan, and we've worked with him because I said, it's not going to help if someone applies for a loan and it's going to take you 2 or 3 weeks to process the loan because folks aren't going to have enough time. So he's agreed to expedite processing of the applications. Yeah.
It's a wonderful organization.
Yeah, he is. And we've also worked with our partners in our Immigration Coalition, the Pro Bono Collaborative, and the Roger Williams Law Clinics, and the Center for Justice. So together we've been working together to try to support positive movement, anti-administration positive movement. And so we're working together to try to raise funds to help offset the cost for those who low income or those who can't afford the full fee. And so we've approached some funding sources. I think someone's going to try to set up a crowdsource funding because people want to help, and so we're thinking, if the money is getting in the way of you in the next 3.5 weeks apply, we don't want to be in the way. We want to be available.
It's an incredible thought that Liberty is basically for sale right now.
Isn't that? I mean, it just doesn't feel like it should. But so what we're doing also is Monday evening at 6 p.m. we're offering what we're calling a DACA information session. So if you're a recipient and you have questions about your individual situation, if you're trying to figure out how to pay for this, we've got Andy and his crew. His loan officers will be on site on Monday night to talk to people about what they need to do in order to apply for a loan. We are also encouraging people who, unfortunately, there's a group of folks that didn't have the $495, so didn't renew when they were supposed to, and now they're not able to be a new application any longer. So we encourage those folks to come in, walk in, make an appointment to find out if there's other options for them, or just find out, what their rights are, and what, so really try to prepare these young folks one way or the other, because we're hoping Congress does something, but given its history recently, I don't know that we can count on that. So that's our big push. So the info session is open to anybody who's interested, quite frankly. 6 p.m. Monday the 11th at our location at 645 Elmwood Ave, and it'll be on our main floor. So again, we're really encouraging any DACA recipients who are eligible for renewal or aren't sure if they're eligible and just need some questions answered, come Monday night. But otherwise, our doors are open Monday through Friday, 9 to 4:30, and or call, make an appointment. The number for an appointment, if I can give it,
Oh, absolutely.
is it's 401-784-8600. And if you call that number, you just say you want to make an appointment to speak to someone about your legal status or your DACA renewal, and we'll get you in as soon as we can.
Excellent. And we'll put that up all on the website and share from there. I know Rodrigo Pimentel very well.
Yeah, he's great too.
And he's been provided some of the most provocative discussion surrounding this. He's kind of his own little force of nature.
Yes.
Unto himself. And if you've ever spent time with Rodrigo, you just know that he's one of those people like, oh my, the people just need to meet.
Yeah. And yeah, he's the best of the best, right? But he illustrates, if you will, the potential that all of our newcomers, refugees, immigrants bring to this country. It just really is because they believe in civics, they believe in
Right.
human rights, they believe in all the things that our country was founded on. And it is kind of sad for me to see that we are where we are. But that's why we're here, because we can make a change day by day.
Is there a great fear that once this period passes, if in fact Congress can't finally get their act together, is there a great fear that the Trump administration will then seek to engage in higher levels of deportations?
Yes. We had heard reports that there was a mega deportation scheduled to start September 17th. And basically the target for ICE was to deport between 8,000 and 10,000 immigrants in 5 days. So they were doing coordinated mega raids, kind of like the drug raids, right? They do a bunch in different
Right.
places and that kind of thing.
Shotgun.
Yeah, kind of that. And the thought was that they were doing this because September 30th is the end of the fiscal year, and they were trying to break records in terms of how many were being
Oh,
deported.
cool. Sort of like a sales goal.
Yeah. Well, Obama was the deportation king, so Mr. Trump has to
That's the irony, by the way, isn't it? President Obama, for all the people who suffer from Obama derangement syndrome and Hillary derangement syndrome, I might want to add just for the moment, if we can lapse into the political for a second, that Obama's gone and Hillary lost. You have your president, you have your Senate, you have your Congress, and you have your Supreme Court. So if you truly want to fix things, as opposed to pontificate fixing things, you can actually do the right thing now. It's completely within your control.
It is.
It really, yeah.
It's hard to believe.
But as I like to tease my Republican friends, there's a great wide world in the Constitution beyond the Second Amendment. The Constitution neither begins nor ends with the Second Amendment. There's the First, the Fourth, the Ninth, the 14th. It's really, I invite them to partake in it at some point. That fourth thing, asked my friend Shanna Curlin, that Fourth Amendment thing they seem to be having a lot of issues with right now. I think we need a little forced indoctrination. I think they need to stop worrying about the culture wars and the end of civilization if we know it, if folks of the same sex get married, or if, God forbid, people like Rodrigo Pimentel are allowed to stay on the streets of Pawtucket and perhaps engage in, maybe a little quiet study. But
so there we have it, right?
There you go. Here's the big ticket, the big ticket issue here. There are a lot of well-meaning folks out there who lead comfortable lives, who are opposed to the suspension of DACA, opposed to sort of the madness that's going on around the country right now. A little bit of money with you guys, your reputation is out there. A very little bit of money donated to you guys goes a very long way.
It actually does.
Yeah. No, I mean, this is, Rhode Island is rife with not-for-profit charitable organizations that have highly paid staffs and recommend lots of things but don't actually do anything. You folks, again, now imagine freedom for sale. For $495, I don't want to sound like one of those Sally Struthers commercials,
Sounded pretty good, though.
but for $495, you too can live safely in a democracy.
I know.
From what you're telling me, and I don't want to make light of this because this is tragic, and I don't use the tragic word very often. There are folks who, because of $495, face a permanent alteration in their ability to stay in the United States.
That's absolutely correct. And I can't believe that I'm agreeing with that, because it just doesn't sound like it can be true, right? For $495, you can be, and so these mega deportations, I said, were actually postponed because of the hurricanes. So thank goodness for hurricanes, right?
Right.
But my fear is that why won't they just wait until March 6th when these DACA recipients their work authorizations begin to expire? You just have to sit outside their house and waiting for the day to happen, and you can. So that's really where we are.
Well, and that's when I'm going to use another local parallel, and that of course is the medical cannabis program.
Okay.
You've got a lunatic who's the Attorney General who sees people in end-stage cancer, multiple sclerosis, any one of a number of maladies whose lives have been positively impacted, in some cases made somewhat, I use the word somewhat, whole again through the use of medical cannabis. And folks in that program have to wonder is if this, my words not yours, this jackass wakes up one morning and decides, hey, I'm going to screw with people with end-stage cancer.
Right. I mean, and it can easily happen. Any of this, and I think he got lost in the late 70s or something, didn't he? I mean,
yeah.
It just feels like we're like going back, not just years, but
back,
decades.
It would be funny if the life circumstances weren't so altering, if it wasn't so tragic, if real people's lives weren't being permanently affected by this.
Yeah.
And if I can add, much is made by the other side about people living in fear. Well, you know what? Guess what? There are people, for any one of a variety of reasons, who are living in fear because of a federal government that's out of control. Now, again, I'm a big irony guy.
Yeah.
So here is the group of people who purport to be for small government and don't want the government to have those kind of disruptive powers, working aggressively to give the government those disruptive powers.
And I wonder, it makes me wonder about the balance of power, right? Is how can this? I guess I hadn't appreciated the power of the Justice Department, because it has been, well, it's managed in the way I thought it should be. So I guess that's the only reason I didn't think they were, of course they should be doing,
well, we all, you and I grew up, I'm older than you, I'm sure, but we all grew up watching the FBI, Truth, Justice, and the American Way. And as someone a lot smarter than me once said, in the halls of justice, justice is in the halls. I don't think, if there's any change that's, I think, more dramatic, it's the notion that there's an entire generation of people who literally don't trust the government. And see, in my words, not yours, because of this out of control aspect. And it appears that there are a number of sides in this argument who are literally screwing with people's lives in exchange for political power.
Yep. I would agree with that.
And that's what has to stop. And actually, as citizens, we still, at least for the time being, have the power to change it.
We have the power, and we can't forget that. We can't get discouraged and overwhelmed, and I mean, I'm exhausted, quite frankly. I said I don't.
I can't, and again, that, let's personalize this for a second. You right now, you have to look on a daily basis into the eyes of tragedy. You're talking about, in many cases, people who came here after enormous struggles, not all of which were successful. There's a trail of tears behind a lot, particularly in the refugees, where family members are either, I'm not sure, and I'm not trying to be flip when I say this, but I honestly not sure what's worse, if you lost a family member, if they disappeared, any one of these things, or if that family member is still back in whatever hellhole politically they find themselves in. I'm not sure I have, as I've gotten older, I have fewer and fewer answers, and I'm not sure that I can answer that. So you and your staff, literally every day, this is not some obscure government bureaucracy making big bucks. You literally stare into the eyes of tragedy on an hourly basis.
And, I hadn't looked at it like that, but it is true. I actually, we have a couple of new staff, and I ran into one of them in the hall, and I said, so how's it going? Peppy. And she said, it's going really great. She says, but it's so heartbreaking. And so that was her first experience of, as you were describing, looking into the eyes and saying, I can't help you. I want to help you, but, there's only so much, or, and again, it's all these regulations that, if you have, if your work authorization expires March 5th, you're okay for another 2 years. If it expired March 6th, you're done. Now, how do you make that okay for somebody, and yet you're the one that has to explain that to
and in so many cases, they left regimes, political establishments, nations, and I use the term nation very loosely, where that type of capricious, cavalier attitude towards justice drove them through literally risk of life and limb to come here.
Thinking it was going to be different.
Right.
Thinking that it was going to be different.
I mean, how, again, not to lapse into the dramatic, but for these people, we are not that far from, may I see your papers, please?
That's what it's beginning to feel like. It really is. I mean, I never thought that it would feel that real, but it is feeling that real. And quite frankly, in Rhode Island, there isn't a lot of show me your papers going on, but it's this, it's bit by bit by bit.
Death by 1,000 papers.
Yeah, that's exactly how it feels. And so, and it's been less than a year. I keep saying that to myself. Okay.
So what I was working up to is, how can folks who listen to this, or ultimately listen to this at some point in the future, you can change lives for a few $100.
And that's absolutely true. And so, I mean, it sounds crass to say, send a little cash and it'll make a difference, but it really will make a difference.
Right.
And so, if not $4.95, if 5 people send $100, that's one person that's
Right.
going to be
Save someone's life.
Absolutely.
Because that's really what it's come down to. So, getting back to my remark, my crass remark about social media, turn off the damn computer. Come into Providence or come into the cities, whether it be through your church or simply engaging in active commerce. Any one of a number of the normal human interactions that used to be workaday that seem to be so remote now. You don't have to order off of Amazon this week. I know Gina's promising us we're going to get out. I know they're listening, but you can still come here as a company, all right? But
and go to Betty's before they close.
Right, please. It's time, and and far from me to say it, but there's a lot of good people who are ponying up. There were people marching tonight.
Yes, tonight.
Downtown. And my hat's off to them. If you're in a position to spend a little money, I'm imagining you're not turning anything away.
Nope.
How can folks donate to Dorcas?
So we, as I mentioned, we are trying to work this weekend on setting up a crowdsource site specifically for Dakka. So if you want to be sure, specifically for Dakka. We do have Facebook and Twitter accounts that have a donate now button. And if you can identify that you want to support Dakka or Dakka fees, so that we make sure that the funds go. And my guess is anything we get in the next few weeks is probably going to be Dakka related. We also have a website. It's DIIR.org. So
Right.
Dorcas International Institute, it's our initials. Go to our website. We have a donate now button. Our address is 645 Elmwood Ave, Providence, Rhode Island, 02907. If you want to do the old-fashioned, write the check and send it in.
You are a not-for-profit.
We are a not-for-profit,
so
and we will send a thank you with your tax-deductible donation until they get rid of the tax code and decide that it's no longer tax-deductible. But
because well, taxation is theft. But that's
Yeah.
And by the way, if you go to the Coalition Facebook page, facebook.com/the Coalition Radio, on today's publicity is actually we shared the link from your website, so people can
great.
click on
Thank
the
you.
link and read more. I have found when I've called your office, your staff to be remarkably accessible.
Try.
There it is. I mean, it's time to help change some lives. Again, my words, not Kathleen. It's we need to move there is a level of civic activism that everyone at any level, at any place in their life can take. It can be very simple, it can be more profound. Everyone's life circumstances are different. Everyone's abilities are different. It's a challenging world we live in. Everyone can participate in this.
Absolutely.
There are no barriers to entry. No one will say no to help of any type. And this is legitimately a crisis. So if you believe truly in liberty, you don't exist just to drip the American flag on your back. If you actually believe in the free exchange of ideas, of people, and of commerce, helping folks who desperately want to be here in the United States and have done so much good is a hell of a way to do it. Get a lot of bang for your buck in that.
That's for sure. That's for sure.
Super. So, well, thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
spending the evening here.
I appreciate
it. Was
it.
short notice, but I hope you'll keep me on the list so we can do our little bit here to publicize your efforts. And I wish you nothing but the best of luck. I hope you do get some rest over the next week.
Well, in 3.5 weeks, I'll take a nap. But
Well, this is hammer time.
Yeah, right.
as they say.
And it's interesting because you did, you indicated it is a sense of urgency. I mean, we don't normally say, oh, we need your money now, or we need, but it really is a very tight time frame, and it's going to go by before we know it. So I do think that it's a crisis, and I
Right.
agree with you there.
And after the crisis passed, I actually, one of the earliest shows we ever did a few years ago, we had Andrew Posner from the Capital Good Fund. Remarkable effort that's gone, and ironic, I hope he's doing well, because I know they have a presence down in Miami, down in Florida.
He's doing extremely well, but yeah, we'll see what happens.
Our thoughts and prayers are out to him and his organization,
Mm-hmm.
but I'll have him on. But in the meantime, right now, we need to focus on the immediate.
And as you said, anybody that needs more information, Monday evening, 6 p.m., 645 Elmwood Ave in Providence. Come with your questions and we'll have the answers. Andy will be there as well, talking about his contribution to the crisis.
Super. Thank you so much.
Thanks again, Pat. Very much.
No worries. Folks, you are in fact listening to the Coalition on the Worldwide Coalition Media Network, broadcasting live here at the Go Local Live Broadcasting Center, 90 Way Boston Street, in the heart of the city we love, Providence, Rhode Island, the naked city, the city of 1,000 stories. We've told a couple more tonight. We're going to tell some more.